I'm Amanda. I should go back. I am the CEO and founder of AI for Education. I'm really excited to have an amazing panel today that is going to be looking at AI ethics, which is very close to, it sounds weird to say my heart, but I think it's one of the most important things we could talk about and one of the most important conversations we should be having writ large, and not just in education, but even more important in education. Today I have three amazing panelists. I have Brina Bryan, who's a former teacher and now a product manager. We've got Dr. Saba, who is the founder of Designing Schools, and then Claire Farwell, who's a director at the at MIA, which is a global organization that's going to be really interesting to learn more about. I love everyone actually already going ahead and putting where you're from. I see people from all over the world. We've got everything from, Barcelona to Tampa, Tulsa, London, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey. So I already see like 15 places, which is pretty cool. Please this is our community. Like we have had now, this is our 13th webinar 12th webinar that we have done. And the thing that I love the most about these webinars is the community that's being formed in these chats. We may not be able to see you, but please share resources. These are your peers. Have conversations. If you have a great resource on ethics or something you'd like to share, please do that. We will have 15 minutes at the end, at the top of the hour for you to ask questions, but we're going to get started in just a moment. This is part of our big webinar series, AI Launchpad. So we're doing ethics today. We have one in 2 weeks on an AI-powered future. Next week is running a PD at your school. And then we're going to have one that's really focused on creating an AI policy. So today's is really about thought leadership and around guidance. We will be practical, but we're really going to deep dive into what it means to talk about AI ethics. So at the end, you're going to be able to connect with us, but we're going to get started right away. So welcome, panel. Thank you all so much for being here. I am honored to have you here, and we're excited to learn more from you all. So I'm actually going to start with Brina. Can you introduce yourself? And I'd love you to talk about the first time you ever used generative AI.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here. This is a really great opportunity to sit with such a wonderful panel. So Brina Bryan, I'm currently in Las Vegas. I'm a career educator. I've been with Clark County School District now for 19 years, currently working in product, managing a suite of educational tools for teachers to develop really high-level lessons for students. And my first experience with GenAI was right at launch. I was an early adopter with OpenAI and thought this was the most amazing thing, right? This is like the wildest thing, like pull it out at party tricks. I remember during the holiday, bringing out my laptop and going, ask it anything. It'll tell you all the things. And slowly, as I started to learn more about the systems, the management, the learning models, I started thinking about what does this mean? What is the impact on education? So I'm excited to be here and talk more about those things.
Yeah, I love that moment where you're like, it can do that. And you're like, no, it can't. And then you show them, and it's everything from this, which I do a lot, to like disbelief. And so I love that was like where you went, and then how very quickly transition into what does this actually mean, which is exactly why you're here. Next, we're going to go to Claire. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling us about your first time with generative AI?
Hello, yes, hi, I'm Claire Farwell, and I'm from MIA, and that global company that you wanted to know more about is a global AI school, female first, and it's all about, we're now about 500 plus women that are learning all about AI and emerging tech and all sorts of other incredible worlds in there. And upskilling, and I mean, there's a lot to do in AI, as we all are here. I've been in EdTech for quite a few years, and it started with me basically just wanting to upskill myself. I'm very interested in the 50 plus club. I'm a little bit biased in that, and it is really absolutely amazing to be here and have such a great lot of panels. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's so great. And I'm, Brina and I are part of MIA now. And this idea of upskilling women, I think is really important. Just yesterday, there was a post on LinkedIn of the top 15 people in AI. And would you like to guess how many were women? Absolutely zero. And so I think it's just...
And you Gen AI experience.
Yes.
Sorry, I was a very
Yes.
bad student and I didn't do my what
That's
wasn't
okay.
request. I was like, yeah. So obviously ChatGPT, yes, but I'm going to be a little different and I'm going to go with Otter. You know, I really like these transcription apps. They know me as sort of like the queen of AI tools. I love to talk about different AI tools. And Otter, which is a transcribing app, basically it helps me out. Everybody needs an assistant, right? So when you're on Zoom, for example, it will basically transcribe everything and it'll send me all the transcription, give me some of like the key takeaways. And then would I like to send an email? Yes, please. It's always good, obviously, to have a look at it and make sure with the hallucinations and who are you talking about? And speaker has a name, you know. But it's absolutely been incredible. And it's very similar to both Magical and Fireflies, but I like Otter. There you go.
Yeah, we had to kick out an otter last week actually because it was in without permissions. We talk about AI ethics. I think that's an interesting one. So we'll definitely be talking about that in a bit. And then finally, Saba, I would love to know more about you and also your first time prompting.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Saba, and I am a former high school history teacher, and I now teach design thinking. I still, still teaching, just a different type of space. And my first experience with generative AI was with design thinking. With design thinking, there was a drop off where people really struggle, and so I was really curious, like, could ChatGPT, which was my first experience, fill that gap, and it did very, very well. So
That's great. And my first time ever prompting was making a rubric, which sounds funny, but like it was something that I really struggled with when I was both a curriculum designer and a teacher. And so I think it's quite funny. Like I've been a CEO, I've done all these things, but the first thing I thought about was like, what would this have done when I was teaching? And I think that that's really interesting that we've all kind of come from different areas for our own use cases and needs. But this is really what's been fascinating about AI is that we all have a different path and we're all learning together. So my first question, I'll start with Brina, is, why should we be talking about the ethics of AI? Like, why is that one of the first things? Like, I believe it's like the first thing we should be talking about. Maybe not everyone believes that, but why do you think it's important to have these conversations?
Oh, indeed. I mean, like I said, my first experience was mostly awe and surprise and amazement. And then you start to think, well, wait a minute, how does this really all play out? Who is this built for? Who's this designed for? And then you think about the internet at large, right? We're talking about scraping the wealth of the internet. Well, who wrote this? Largely English language speakers, largely men, largely white men, right? So we're providing this entire swath of the internet for everyone, but it's still marginalizing the people on the fringe. So when we think about, is this the tool for everyone? Is this the answer for all things? Well, we're giving back to our learners the same thing that we've already put out there. So really asking ourselves, is this what we want for students? Certainly from our perspective as adults, I certainly think this is an amazing tool that educators can use at large for a myriad of things. But do students have the nuance, the capability, the ability to consent and navigate this space in a way that's safe and meaningful? And I question that in a lot of ways. I know we mentioned earlier in our previous conversation, this idea that we're asking for ethics on the user side and not ethics on the creation side. And that's really where I stand, is understanding what's the best way to utilize a tool that has this much energy and this much power in a way that students can be safe, that students can not, find things that shouldn't be necessarily part of their learning experience, and certainly also not have any of our student data harvested in the benefit of the creation of that technology.
Yeah, you've said a lot here that I'm sure we're going to unpack together. But the things that really stand out to me is that, if for those of you that know, like when we talk about ChatGPT and other large language models, we're talking about these big computer programs that have been trained on enormous sets of data without consent. So for example, the entire internet with ChatGPT. And what we know about the internet is it's not a particularly unbiased place. It's actually a very explicitly biased place in some places, and a very subtly biased place. So one of the things I've been talking about lately is that who knows the number of editors on Wikipedia that are white men. And then you say, like, I never thought about it. It's where a lot of people go, and it was trained a lot. It's about 80%. And so there are also these very subtle ways in which bias comes into this. So I think that that's going to be something we're going to talk about a lot. And then also, where does the ethical debate stay? Is it about the user or is it about those building? So next time we go to Claire, same questions. Why is it so important for us to have this conversation right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of right now is, there has been, I think everything has naturally gone the way it has gone, with pandemic, I remember somebody saying a couple of decades ago, data is going to be the next best thing, data. And I'm like, goodness. And then, of course, it's all naturally happened. If you look at after the pandemic and all of that data and, everybody knows, what vaccination all over the world, whatever. And then suddenly, we have just data everywhere. And then we have, with the whole sort of highlights of Black Lives Matter, with LGBTQ, everything, diversity, everything's all just being thrown up. And I think that so much has had to change, but the fact that it's all come up and it's there bubbling is really, it's about now. It's about changing it now before it's too late. So to put all these different regulations in place, and obviously, when I look, it's like I'm looking at EU, I'm looking at Australia, looking at UK, USA, everybody is kind of similar. The UK's not just because I'm British, for God's sakes, I live in Spain, but they're all like, we're going to be in the lead. Well, it really is about putting, stipulations in. Of course, when it comes to the gender bias and the bias of it, we really have to, like Melinda Gates says, we really need to do it now to stop the baking bias in the system. So for me, it really is about yesterday and setting the rules in place. I could go on, but I've got more questions.
We do have more questions. Yeah, no, I think that one of the more interesting conversations I've had lately is that if you think about what the big large language model like OpenAI is saying and Anthropic is like, the train's already left the station and, we're just going ahead and it's already, if we did have copyright infringement, it already happened. We're just going to stop telling you what we did. But realistically, these are computer programs. You can go and turn off data centers and GPUs. You can actually stop this. This is not something that cannot be unpicked. And I think that this is something that's really important to your point, Claire, is that like there is this need to like not just go and just build and do because that's what's happened and it's showing this amazing advancement. Like this is actually our opportunity to stop and to listen and to build better and like actually learn from mistakes with past things like the social media, handheld devices, the internet, which have had deep and meaningful and harmful impacts on young people and people of all types. So I think that that's really going to be a part of our conversation today as well. And then Saba, same question to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that's important to have this conversation now is because I really believe that everybody has an opportunity to shape what happens moving forward. And having been somebody who was very active, I think just on social media platforms and things like that, I think when you look at the trajectory of the last decade, I think there is a balance of accountability for people and how passive we've been through the evolution of technology, particularly over the past decade. When you think about when we first got introduced to social media, it was about 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And the idea that like our school systems, our workplaces, our societies haven't really kept pace. Now, all of a sudden, we're like in a moment where you're forced to be accountable and it's hard. Because words like what copyright means has changed significantly. There are people who are making livings by sharing information on the internet. And so one of the things that I think this is a real opportunity for is for people to be more aware. People are asking questions now about their data that they have not been asking for the past 2 decades. And so this is not, I don't think many of the things are new. I think we just have a different level of awareness. And I think that's an opportunity that we can build on moving forward.
Oh, I love that. I mean, absolutely. It's like the frog in the boiling pot of water, right? I feel like it came around us. And then the axiom of if it's free, you're the product. Like it became just like people started talking about that. But it wasn't something like today, which I think the reason why we have so much exposure to it is that this is the first time a really big technology has gone to market and has become consumer facing so quickly. It took, Facebook 5 years to get to the same number of users it took ChatGPT 5 months to do. And so what we've done is we've gotten very, very, very fast. And we talk about education, like Khan Academy is created Conmigo so fast, and its system has all of the same problems that we're going to talk about with hallucinations and bias and safety that ChatGPT does. But people are going so fast that it's forcing us, hopefully, to actually look at these things in a more like significant and critical eye, which I think is just an absolute, like, it's necessary. You're right, Saba. This isn't new. This is not new at all. This has been forever. It's just now, we're no longer have blinders on. It's right in front of us. That's a great point. The next question. So this is about education. Like, I love that we're doing this together. And so, we're all educators, which I love, and we all have our own experiences. And so I wanted to move this so that the greater conversation about the ethics of AI is incredibly important. We talked about a lot of those reasons. But what do you think, Verena, is the most important ethical consideration for an educator or a leader today about what we are thinking about with generative AI?
Well, you mentioned the key phrase, right? If the product is free, you're the product. And I really have deep concerns about student privacy. Right now, we have the option as users, as paid users, even with ChatGPT, to not use our data, what we provide the system as a training model. But we're not asking those questions of other tools that we want to use with children. So, for example, I work in EdTech in my school district. We have to consistently remind educators to not send student identifiable information via email. Stop doing that, right? We have systems in place. We have products that will encrypt that type of information and not send it just via general email. So we're reminding people about student privacy and data protection right now. But then you think about the implications of ChatGPT. There's nothing that's stopping a special education teacher from dropping in an IEP and asking for support. Well, that's an amazing use, but now you're providing a system and training information on student data. So not just about, what their scores are, but really unique things that I think should be designed by a human. Similarly, I was listening recently to a podcast, and the host was mentioning that his child was questioned by the school on whether or not she would appreciate having an AI guidance counselor. Now, imagine the type of deep information that will be provided by that student to that AI guidance counselor that has the potential to be released on the internet. We know that right now our education systems, especially public education in the US, is extremely at risk of hacking. Right now, I think the estimate is about 80% of public schools and education institutions have had incidences of breaches, theft of data. So now we're going to put more information about students on the internet, more really unique information about students on the internet, and the risk is now higher, right? Because it's not just an SAT score and a birthday. Now we're talking about really personal things about students that are, could potentially be released out there, and for all sorts of uses, not just the uses that teachers would have.
Yeah, Verena, nail on head. I think what's really interesting is it's not just students, it's teachers too, that are giving their own freely available data in a deep way about their experiences, what works or doesn't work. They're the amount of information that is being led into ChatGPT, for example. But what about the systems that are built off of ChatGPT and maybe also use Claude and Llama 2, and they're using their own model, where your data could potentially be stored and sent in 6 or 7 places. And that's going to be even more hard to follow, because these systems, if you go and ask an EdTech that's building generative AI, they're trying to keep their IP, their intellectual property. And if you ask them what they do and how it's stored, it's really, really difficult to unpick. And I think that that's where we're going to start to see where it's not just ChatGPT that's got this data and training and potential breaches, but all of that intersectional pieces where it could be in 6 or 7 places and you have no idea, which is quite different than a lot of what we see in education technology today. So thank you for that. So for Claire, what do you think is the most important ethical consideration for educators? I know you're thinking about it slightly differently, but I would love to understand what you think is most important.
No, goodness, I wish that we could have a way of experimenting with this on another planet or something. Okay, I haven't lost my mind, but why are we experimenting with this in real time right now without having set all of these rules and regulations, right? Okay, well, too late, right? And like you said as well, Verena, like there are tools, and yeah, that's going to be great to help out. Of course, there are pluses on it, but what about the data and the privacy? So I mean, I wrote down obviously about equal opportunities for students, you know, gender bias, but in block capitals, because I was trying to make the decision with one thing, privacy was ruled. So that's why I nodded my head with Verena. You know, I think we tend to put the children first, because as mothers and parents, you know, whatever, if you have any, it's just the way it is naturally. So yeah, the students' privacy, but as you said as well, the parents and the teachers as well. So yeah, I mean, those rules and regulations, they have to really be, you know, drummed in. And then obviously there's questions that we have later on that I'll answer in that respect. But for me, and for knowing, you know, there are different tools like Glaze, for example, is a tool that I just read about, that for artists, you can actually now, you know, have this, and then the art will actually have some sort of a glaze over it, so machine learning will be able to pick up on it. So there needs to be things that are created now quicker, right, for the privacy, etc. And that, you know, but unfortunately, we, you know, to go back to what I said, we have to run with this experiment, and the tools and that are being created as we move along.
Yeah, and I think that the speed to which, like, so for Claire, you talked about this idea we're doing it in real time. I think, and Josh in the audience said, but we've experimented with social media and also with, you know, internet in real time. But the issue is those things were out and thought about for a really long time before they became something that 100 million people use, or 200 million people, or a billion people use. So when we talk about generative AI, we're talking about something that's not a step change, but a magnitude change. It is not better Google. The thing that we know most about technology is like how to use social media and how to Google. That's our kind of our level of digital literacy. That generative AI is not better Google. It is a magnitude change, and it's also going so quickly. These first models have been out for 9 months for us to be able to use, and they're being integrated into not just hundreds of tools, but thousands upon thousands of tools, many of which are already in schools. And they're being done so when the foundational models themselves have immediate and very big flaws. And so when we talk about this, like, we're not building upon this really great technology that works all the time. What we're building upon is this very new, very clunky, and sometimes actually damaging technology that is then being integrated and pushed out to us as if it's going to fix things and make it better or be fit for purpose for schools. And it's just not. It's just absolutely not fit for purpose at this stage. So I think that this is where it starts to get very different than any other thing that we've ever experienced, but it is something that has some similar pieces. So to you, Saba, what do you think is the most important ethical concern? I know this is a tiny question. We could just answer this in one word. It's totally fine. But what do you think is going to be the most important ethical consideration?
Yeah, it's so funny listening to you, because I think like it's also such a, I don't want to say, I don't know if it's controversial, but I think there's so many different opinions. And I think one of the things that's so important right now is that we really are honest with ourselves about the state of where we are. So if I had to say the answer to that question in one word, it would be values. I think, it's interesting to see how diverse the chat is, because how this plays out really makes a difference on the values of the society that you live in. People in Finland, people in Sweden have a very different way of looking at these things than, say, people in the United States do. And so I think that's one differentiation I would make, because there's such an international audience here, is that the values of your society really dictate the use of so many different technologies. But I would actually beg to differ just a little bit, in that while yes, it feels like a magnitude change, it feels that way because we haven't been paying attention. And I think that's a really, really important thing to bring up, because I think if we don't drive that point home enough, I think we soften things for people and let them think that your next 5 years are going to be okay. And they probably won't be, unless you really start to take things seriously about how you need to make up for the skills that perhaps haven't been developed over the last decade. And I think right now I think it's going to be one of the greatest equity challenges we see, in that there are people who are able to integrate this in, who it's just a natural evolution for them. and some people who feel like the world has just fallen apart. And I think we have to ask ourselves why we have such a discrepancy and why people are feeling that way, and how we help these people who do feel that way really begin to upskill, because this can really, really, really help you do things that we haven't been able to do before better and faster if you have the right problem solving skills and the right types of mindsets and strategies from a culture perspective to be able to accompany it. But I think when we see things like, I was listening to, and I think what really did this for me is, there's one book I recommend right now. It's The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman. When you read about how AlphaGo was happening, when you read about the chess things, and you see the little things that were happening, yes, it's surprising. Yes, it's powerful. But when we think about the iPhone and the first iteration of iOS and where we are now, it's really not, I don't think it's that different. It's definitely really powerful, and it's definitely more democratized in what people have access to. But I always think it's about what you do with that access and the opportunities it creates versus the access itself. Everyone has a mobile phone. Some people make millions from their mobile phone. Other people are depressed and have mental health issues from their mobile phone. So it's all about the use of the tool and the skills you have and your ability to adapt.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the democratization aspect of this. Like, that's the thing that I get really excited about. Like, when I did a training today with like 70 teachers of all different types. And maybe 8 of them had ever used ChatGPT, and mostly for just dabbling. And one of the things that was really cool at the end, I got to say to them, they all built their own prompts, and they all did prompt engineering. Like, you just created something for the first time, like all of you, with technology. We have democratized this, and people did it in Spanish, and it doesn't work as well out of Western kind of like more specific cultures and languages. But it was something pretty cool to say, like, you wouldn't have to do 5 years or a boot camp. Like, you actually got to create something new with technology. That I think the democratization aspect of that's really great. The equity of access piece is actually really interesting too, because it's actually like Claude isn't available or Bard isn't available in some countries. Some of them, the bandwidth is going to make it almost impossible for people to use. So I think that that's something that we really have to consider. But I think what's so fascinating about this is that there are 2 things that I think fascinating. One is that there's a lot of like really good and really bad possibility. Like, it's a real continuum. There's a lot we're going to talk about today, that there's like that tension between the 2. But also, if we had the same webinar in 6 months, I'd be really fascinated to see what we'd be saying and what would be the same and different, because I think that's going to be a fascinating. This is something that is a moving target. That is really, it's really a fascinating piece. It changes every day. And I think that this is where we're going to have this as an ongoing conversation, which is pretty clear. So I'm going to switch the order just a bit. Yeah, go ahead, Saba.
No, I was just going to say that one thing, though, that I think remains a constant that goes back to ethics and values is today, when you walk into most schools, they align themselves with a corporation. Like, when I used to work at Apple, every single time we walked into a school, they would say, we're a Google school. And I think that mindset shift of the tools that we align ourselves with, like tomorrow, are you going to start saying you're a ChatGPT school, you're an OpenAI school? And so that's why I really go back to, like, even though, yes, like so much is changing and so much is shifting in the next 6 months, if we don't shift our mindset around what it really means to bring technology into schools, really understanding the business models and values of these companies, that to me is the ultimate responsibility when you think about student privacy, is really understanding what is the business model of a company, what tools are you bringing in, and how are you going to advocate for those tools to be shaped in a certain way moving forward, instead of saying like, hey, hold on, technology, please don't race ahead because we're not ready for you.
Yeah, no, these corporations are not out there for the social good. These corporations are out there. OpenAI was developed to make money. And so they're going to have a bottom line. It's very specific. And I agree completely. I mean, I'm working with a school right now, or a district right now, that's using Bard, but only because they already used Google. And like, even though it's not nearly as good for the things they want to do, it doesn't really matter because they're already a Google school. And I think that's going to be very, very interesting. And just one more thing to call out, I don't like one of the powers of backlash is that Zoom, which we're on right now, put out a terms of service that said, hey guys, if you want, like, we're going to use this to train our algorithms and our machine learning models and generative AI. And people read it and made a big enough deal that they walked it back. They'll still do it if you turn on the AI tools. So there's not really an off switch unless you actually take that out. But I think that there is that opportunity, to Saba's point, that we can collectively say, hey, wait a second, we're not going to give you any data at all, because that's our data and that's our power, the same way that a big organization has that same power to say the same thing and build their own. So I'm going to switch the order just a bit, because we've already kind of dived into education, and a lot of people in the chat are really kind of talking about what this means at the education, at the coalface, right? What is happening actually in systems, in schools. And so what I want to say is, like, so Verena, when you think about what this means to teach people to be ethical consumers or users of this technology in schools, whether that's students, it's teachers, it's parents, it's community members, like, what do you think is most important for that to be true, that we can create that ethical use? Not being able to necessarily go knock on Sam Altman's door and say you have to change, but like, what can we do from the grassroots place to ensure that there's ethical, or at least attempt to have ethical adoption?
Absolutely. So I kind of wasn't watching the chat, but I saw someone mention the terms of service. Read it. They're pretty short in most instances, and it gives you a lot of very clear information about how the tool will be used, and what your information will be used for. So I certainly think starting there, before you log in, read the terms of service, because we have things like age of consent, right, is a very big thing right now with AI tools, and we're allowing students as young as 6 to use technologies that were not designed for them at all, in the least. In addition to that, I think it's really important. Here we are, on a really nice day in the middle of the day, but we also need to make this type of conversation accessible for people who are working right now, or parents who have no idea what this is. We need to explain to them, first of all, generative AI might be new kid on the block, but we're using machine learning when you are using AI in schools, and being very clear about what that is. So student assessment, largely AI based, right? So we need to help people understand, like, what's already in play, what the uses are currently, and then engage everyone in the conversation, engage children in the conversation. I know it was mentioned earlier about having cell phones. Not in really low income schools, kids don't have cell phones, right? So we're asking them to be proficient in a technology that they don't really have access to because they're not on their Chromebooks. So I think it's really important to have a wide swath of engagement, not just people that are purveyors of technologies, not just us that are educators, but really engaging our parents, our students, and our community members in what this is supposed to look like, what we envision for our future, because we're being told right now what it can do for us. We need to flip that. We need to tell these corporations and these product managers what it is that we need, right? We're not a product looking for a solution.
Oh, that's said as a true product manager. I love it. So that is amazing. So we often say that, like, people have solutions and looking for problems, especially in education technology. But I think what's really interesting here is that what you're talking about is, like, we don't want to reinforce these structural inequities that around access, cultural capital, institutional capital. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about, Verena, is, like, if you create a policy, it needs to have language, and like for teachers, for students, for community members, it needs to be in their language, not just translated. But if I'm a parent and we're talking about appropriate and inappropriate uses, I should include not just student appropriate and inappropriate uses, but also parent appropriate and inappropriate uses. So if you think, oh, I'll just go in there and do it with my kid, like, that's not what we want, right? Or like what this looks like. And I think that that's a really strong way to do it, because if you have a policy in place, the worst thing you could possibly do is put a policy in place that is either too complicated or not accessible. And so when you have something that is, like, simple, structured, but also accessible, not just in the sense of it shows you what it means, but also, like, it actually works for people and you're giving them outlets to be able to see that and process, we have a lot better chance of it being adopted and it being something that can create a common language and understanding, which I think is going to be so important right now. So I really appreciate that. So to you, to Claire, what do you think is most important about supporting people to be ethical users of this technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplicity of it as well, and putting it in those different languages for all of those people involved, just as we do at MIA, the global community that we have. We're after upskilling non-technical female first, right? I mean, at this stage, we're all pretty much non-technical when it comes to AI. You know, okay, some of us are a little bit ahead on the curve, but we just have to simplify it and really break it down. You know, that we're going to have to get on with it. And there's that saying, obviously, you know, if you don't use AI, then AI is going to be sort of replacing your job, sort of thing. So, you know, it was going to happen. You know, let's talk about the positive side of it all. And I think another positive side, once we have all these sort of regulations and things set in place, is to concentrate and bring back, because of more productivity, you know, children will be learning about, you know, prompting rather than, there was a school that I think when this was a couple of months ago in San Francisco, said, right, everybody can use ChatGPT, but I'm going to be judging you on the prompting that you're doing rather than the answers that, you know, that you're going to be giving. And there's all sorts of different creative things to do. And I really want to have more, you know, obviously we know that, you know, with machine learning, with all of AI, that soft skills, you know, we need to really focus on soft skills. Art, bring back some more bloody art in the schools, right? Empathy, all of these incredible things that we are going to, creativity, you know, and whatever that means, is like, let's just bring that up a little more. No excuses, right? If you're going to be shaving off time, you know, as far as, you know, helping teachers with this productivity tools, then bring back more of the good stuff for the kids. To help with the mental well-being as well. You know, we all know what music and art and all those soft skills and empathy to one another and diversity can do. So I think that I want to really focus on the positive and let's get more of that.
I love it. And we did a webinar on like AI resistant and AI assisted assessments. And what we found is that like AI assisted assessments or even resistant ones need to have soft skills, critical thinking, creativity. So art, music, like it has to have those things. That when you just have something that's simple, like a writing prompt or a math prompt, it's very easy for that to be replaced and done by an AI. But when you start to do the things you just said around soft skill development, the 21st century skill building, the creativity, that's where it actually becomes very hard for AI to do, because that's what makes us special. And we have gotten very far away from that, if ever we were there. They say bring it back, but like I don't think I ever had that truly as in education. We have an industrial model where I've pretty much always in my entire life, whether it was in elementary, middle school, high school, grad school, college, where I sat in a row or a desk and I listened and I sometimes collaborated, but I very rarely actually did the work that you're talking about. So I think this might be an opportunity to actually do it for the first time, because we have to, because a 5-paragraph essay and an application to a college is like not a thing anymore. And it's going to be something the standardized tests are going to have to adapt, or they're just going to be completely and totally obsolete. And like, that's just what's going to happen. So to Saba, I know you're nodding and I can tell, but like, what do you think? Like, what do you have to do to be able to create that kind of ethical foundation?
Yeah, I just want to like echo like every single skill like Claire like shouted out. Like those are the things that like just make us so uniquely human, especially I would say especially the empathy, which is why I'm a really big advocate for design thinking. I think, you know, AI can do so many things and it's going to get better and better and better. But that insight, those observations, those things that we see in our environment from things that are, you know, spoken and unspoken really are, I think, still what make us unique, and sharpening that skill set is so important. But I think when I say, what you say sort of like, what's the most important thing? I think there's two things that complement each other. And the first one is really learning how to learn. I will say, I find it, I think this is something really important to bring to the forefront and discuss, that, you know, the institutions and our systems that are designed to prepare people for the future have no clue about the future and are waiting for somebody to come to their doorstep to teach them prompting. And I think we have to ask these really hard questions. If you are the people as educators who want to maintain your role in an AI world, you know, I think just what does the definition of a teacher even mean anymore? Because I will tell you, I feel like I learn the most sometimes from like, after I would say high school. I think this doesn't apply so much to elementary, because at the elementary level, that relationship building, those things actually still really exist to a large degree. I think when we start to hit 5th grade, 6th grade and go on upwards. But, you know, I'm somebody who left high school. I was in an APIB program and I left high school, went to college because it was a waste of my time. I didn't need somebody to be reading a textbook to me, and I don't think much has changed. And so I think when we think today about the number of people that have online courses, how many people are learning from each other in community-based spaces, I think I personally don't tell that narrative that just because you're a teacher, you're irreplaceable. I don't think that's true. I think when we say that, I think we're thinking of a very specific type of teacher that is not sort of like, everywhere. And so I think learning to learn is a really, really important one. And then for young people, I think honoring your voice. I think when people bring up plagiarism and all these things, I think it's one of the biggest pieces that's missed in that narrative. And I think that's where people are trying to go. But most people don't find our voice through a 5-paragraph essay. And I think, there was a moment the other day where ChatGPT was down. And I remember I was going on there for something, and I was like, it really hit me in that moment. Like, thank God I am in touch with my voice. Even today, when we think about like the proliferation of content being created with ChatGPT, if I see the word delve, if I see the word tapestry, like there's just like, I have like a list of 10 words that if I see these words, I know that that's not you. And I think how you honor your voice, how you understand your personality, how in tune and how in touch you are with your unique self is going to be the biggest differentiator beyond text. I think it's going to be video, how you show up in audio, how you show up in video, how you show up as a person is going to be your most defining thing. And the two things that help you do that are learning to learn and really being able to honor, practice, and find your voice, which takes a long time. It doesn't happen in like a 45-minute lesson.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I will say I do use delve, but that's because I'm a weirdo and I have a weird vocabulary, but I promise it's me. But there's recent, a couple of things that have come out that the latest estimation is that by 2026, about 90% of all things on the internet will be synthetic. So developed and designed, whether that's images, it could be video too, video, text, imagery. And we're already seeing that there are more images created by Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, which are text to image generators, in the last year than there have been images before. And so I think it's something that when you talk about voice, it's really important. And I just want to highlight a couple of things also that kind of piggyback on what everyone said here is that there are like really important things that we're talking about here that don't have to be we're talking about high schoolers or kindergartners. This is for everybody. We're all, like you talk about learning to learn, Saba, like we all keep learning. Adult learners, if you're at different areas of whether you're doing K12, higher ed, you're doing L&D, realistically, what we're talking about here is a couple of things I think are really important. One is just literacy. Like, what does it mean to be literate at this point? And for us, it means digital literacy, not just AI literacy, but digital literacy, which has been brought up multiple times. This is not new. We have been doing this for a really long time. The first chatbot is not 20 years old, it's 60 years old. It was still really bad, but this is something that's been around for a long time. But then the other pieces that we need to think about is that this is an opportunity for us, though, to actually take advantage of the moment and start to be more active consumers of our own lives and technology and learning. And I think that that's where it gets really excited because this could be a forcing mechanism for us to do that. So what I'm going to do is that we're actually not going to have time for our last question because there's so many good questions. I want to say, first of all, before we go, because I know some people have had to leave and will have to leave, I just want to thank our panel. I wish you guys could I'll give the round of applause because you can't be here, but you can't do this, but everyone has done such a beautiful job. Not only that, but thank you to everyone in the chat. We love to see this and just really, really appreciate you. And so what we're going to do now is I'm just going to throw up really quickly our LinkedIns. We're actually I'll talk for myself, but I met some of these women on LinkedIn and then Brina connected me to Claire. I will always say yes to a conversation or a hello. Please reach out to us. Claire is in the middle, but we are people that are part of your community and we just hope you enjoyed this. So please connect with us. What we'll do is we'll send an email tomorrow with the resources. We had some great podcasts that were mentioned, some research. We've had a book that's Saba, you mentioned that I didn't catch the author for. So we'll include that all tomorrow, as well as a recording that you can share. And we have this here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start going to the Q&A. If you haven't put it in the Q&A yet, I will promise you guys talked too well for me to catch all of them. So please put them there. But what I'm going to do is let's do, Letitia had a question. Please provide concrete examples of the harms that could be done to students. We talk abstractly about ethics and the harms, but what is actually like a harm? And I know that was actually Brina, you had talked about that. So maybe do you want to take that question?
Sure. So one of the things, we haven't really seen it yet, right? We haven't really seen a true full adoption in classrooms to really get inequality data. But I'll give you an example of a harm that I perceive. And that is, I'm not going to mention the actual technology, but they were suggesting that this technology could be used for social emotional learning. We know that elements of social emotional learning are larger than language itself. So if we're asking a large language model to help a child develop social emotional learning practices, we are missing the entire swath and breadth of what it means to be human. Language is not our only way to communicate. We communicate in other ways, verbal and nonverbal, both. And if we're suggesting that an AI chatbot can be a solution for that, we're really missing the mark on how students learn and develop.
Yeah. And some other examples that might be helpful are like, there was someone that was arrested because his AI girlfriend said it would be cool for him to try to kill someone. We've had people that have self-harmed, attempted suicide. We have had, you can hijack Cognigo, or you could like a month ago, to tell you how to compare and contrast bombs. And so there are lots of ways that are deeper than the security issues, but that we don't have a lot of information about synthetic relationships, how it can impact students. But there are also just common ones of like, it can provide you access in really deep ways of how to do something that would be very prohibitively difficult to do, that can be extremely damaging. So I think there's a lot of really deep ways. I don't know if Saba or Claire, do you want to add anything, or we want to take another question up to you all?
I think the only thing I would just add to that is like, that to me is like one of those perfect opportunities to co-design. I think so many times we think of situations as either or, but you know, the reality, like, okay, so the book was The Coming Wave. It's like I always have a current obsession with the book, but that's the latest one, just came out yesterday. But he's the founder of Inflection AI, who built the chatbot Pi. But he talks a lot about the values with which he has designed the chatbot, with the fact that he's designed that chatbot to be this sort of like personal intelligence assistant to you, can be done in a responsible and an ethical way. But I think, again, like that's the responsibility of like co-designing. And I think the only thing is like, we really take for granted sometimes, like this was a line that really struck me, just as somebody who's got 3 sisters, how many people don't have someone in their life they can just talk to before a hard conversation? How many people don't have people in their lives to give them advice in really difficult moments? And as much as we would like to say, hey, that's what a human does best, humans are failing in that regard, because those aren't places where we've placed value, even though verbally we may have. When we look at the actions, when we look at the things we ask kids to do, especially in schools, just homework levels alone that we do show that we do not prioritize and value that sort of connection and that thing. And so while, yes, we're moving in that direction, but I think it's just a wake-up call. If a computer is moving in a direction faster than you, what does that say about the state of us? And then what do we do about that? And how do we address that? So I just think it's a great opportunity to co-design and actually listen to people who are creating these technologies about what we want that to look like moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. And oh, sorry, go ahead, Claire.
No, I'm sorry. I was just like, I want to say it really quickly so that we can move on to the next questions, because there's so many. But I agree. It's like having an assistant. It's like, it's better on the positive side to have, if somebody really needs some sort of questions answered, to have something there at least that's like, I'm here, I'm listening, and I'm going to get you the right person, because absolute zero sometimes can be worse. So I guess it is always about, you know, we're not ready to let it loose on its own. But you know, as you say, like this partnership, and then perhaps in the future again, but it's, you know, the positive side of things.
Absolutely. And I think, again, if we were talking in 6 months or a year, we would be having a very different conversation, where maybe the technology is caught up, or we can lower hallucinations, or we can create better wall-guarded approaches where things can be a bit safer. But I think that this is an opportunity that you can see immediately what it would mean for people to actually have an outlet, or to have. Actually, before when I started AI for Education, we were building a well-being tool, because I'm a researcher in well-being and it's very close to my heart. And I stopped because I thought the technology was too early. It doesn't mean I don't think it's possible, but like, we have an epidemic of loneliness and isolation, and it's culturally specific, but it's at the same time widespread. And so I think that this can be an opportunity. It's just the question of when, how, and what regulations are in place to ensure that these are things that are actually going to not make things worse, because sometimes things, even though they look good at the beginning, can actually make things worse in the long run. So we're going to move to the next question. So this is from Josh, who has his own podcast. Thank you, Josh. So question, in schools, where do you think these conversations should take place? Should it be in faculty meetings, in classrooms, in community meetings? Like, who should start that conversation? This is something I think about all the time. So, but Brina, I see your head nodding. Do you have a thought about this?
Oh, I mean, everywhere. This should be a community-wide conversation. So first off, I think, if you're an educator, you're in the classroom, ask your students what they know already, right? What are experiences they have? I know you mentioned Pi. I was beta tested that early on, and I found a lot of flaws in that system. It's not designed for children in any way, shape, or form. So really ask what students are doing, how they're doing it, and then talk to, again, faculty meeting. What have you heard? What have you done? And then bring parents in. What have you heard? What have you done? Because this is a question and answer period, right? We want to really hear from people what they're hearing in the media, what they're seeing online, what their experiences are. Maybe someone has had an experience either in hiring or applying for a mortgage or with law enforcement with regard to AI that was a negative experience. Find out what those are, see what people's apprehensions are, and then build from there.
Can I just say, this is the thing that I sometimes think we miss is like, just ask first. Like, just ask. Like, what do you think about it? What are you doing? We'd often skip that point where we just go in and say, this is what needs to be done. But everyone is going to have their different opinion. I was in a room of 10 people, and I will tell you that I had terrified to amazing in 10 people. And she actually used the word terrified. And so I think that that's such a good example. So Claire, you have a different kind of group. Like, you actually do this training with people from all, like, women from all over the world. So like, how do you think about like who's owning this? Is it like you have organizations like your own? Is it the person being proactive? Like, what do you think is actually the place in which these conversations should be started?
Yeah, I mean, we have such a diverse community of like people from over 50 different countries, and we welcome everyone. And people come in with jobs, without jobs, over 50, return to work. I mean, just everything you can imagine. And, we're doing like these AI challenges, these 5-day sprints, all these events and stuff like that. And they're taking it back. And we just sort of assume, well, everybody knows what's going on. Surely they know about these tools and this, that, and the other. And they go back and they go, oh my gosh, I introduced this in my company. And it was like, woohoo. And it's just like, wow, and it really doesn't take too much just to know a few little tools, but there's just so many thousands and thousands of all these different things. And it just takes sort of little picking and choosing and then focusing on these different departments and then just taking a couple and taking them back in. And it's not rocket science, right? It really isn't. And it's back to that simplicity again. I hope I'm answering your question.
No, it's perfect. Yeah. It's like I think that's the thing I think about when you say that, Claire, is like, it's a show, not tell. And like, if you show someone the value of it, it's like literally the reactions are visceral. Well, people will move their bodies.
Absolutely. And it's all about the community. And it's interesting with the female first as well. And, listen, lads, I mean, that's the guys, obviously. We're all about allies, and we're all about, you lads and chaps and everything too. But it's really about, this strength in numbers of women and this support. And we had like a well-being event, and it was so incredible how honest and brave. Obviously, well-being is at the core of everything. You can't learn anything, you can't do anything, obviously, if you're not feeling good. And it was just absolutely amazing how raw and honest these women were. And I think, to wrap this up, when you have the power of numbers of women like this, shit is going to get done, right? And we're seeing it, and this inspiration is incredible. And yet, when you have maybe, a couple of women that are trying to go for a same position in a company or whatever, you have friction. It naturally happens because that competition is going to be there. So it's a very interesting thing watching the power of numbers. And I truly believe that everybody's inspiring each other as well. And this AI and all of this stuff, it is a lot easier because it's like, oh, look, I'm 20, I'm 50, I'm out of work, I'm this, and I'm using this tool and it's helping, right? So it's the power of the numbers and inspiration sticking together.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's so important to talk about like that network effect that can happen. And you talking about getting shit done with power of numbers, and ladies, like this is a perfect example. The panel is that absolutely. I'm going to end with one question. I'm going to start with you, Saba. This is a question that I hear constantly, and I think we all hear it, which is that kids, like people just plagiarize with AI. And so, like, what do you think about when you talk to schools? And I know you talk to a lot of superintendents and leaders. How do you talk about this that division? Like, how do you think about students using this to do all of their work or to plagiarize or to use it as their own versus teaching them, like you talk about all the time, like co-design, learn all those pieces. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually really lean a lot on atomic habits. It's one of my, like, I think favorite phrasings of just a larger way to zoom out and think about it. Where if you haven't read the book, it's the whole thing between what the difference when we focus on identity and who we want to be versus outcomes and what we hope to get. And it's always, I'm always like inspired. I always tell people, like when I walk into a school, we have words like, the mascot, and then, our students like persevere, are creative, or we have these like frameworks, these graduate profiles. And I always say, like, nowhere on any of these documents do we have the word cheater. And so we don't view students through that lens at first glance. We view them as people who are resilient, who are creative, or whatever, markers it is that, you as an organization have identified. And so I really encourage people to, so he talks about in the book that the identity you give people is ultimately what is reinforced, like you act from that lens. And so I always say, like, instead of like looking at this through the lens of, oh my God, every single student is a cheater, because by default, when we make plagiarism the main topic, what we're essentially saying is, hey, we believe every kid is a cheater. That's why this is going to be such an issue. When you start looking at like, okay, how do we help create a culture where kids are empathetic, where we reinforce their identity that they're creative, where we reinforce their identity that they're ethical, where we reinforce the identity that they think critically, that they communicate all these values that are written on our walls and our posters and our websites, we have a different mindset towards the different kinds of things we do. And then once we begin to understand that, it's like, okay, well, how do we do that? And that's really where, we begin looking at things like process over product. I always say, like, I actually think there's like so much, I always say, like, one of the things that really I think is important is finding your voice, knowing what makes you unique, how to advocate for yourself, how to sell yourself and things like that. And I think a portfolio is such a big piece of that. And, whether for somebody that's writing, whether for somebody that's video, whether for somebody that's audio, whether for somebody it's art and drawing, or whether it's a combination of those that complement each other in different ways, we are so much more than a 5-paragraph essay. And I think when that isn't the beginning and the end of your assignment, you're more motivated to engage in that process. And the end product can look so different, which again, these are not like new things, like people have been doing them for like the last 20 years. We haven't chosen to adapt our practices. And so assessment is probably going to be the biggest challenge of all. But I don't know how many, I think there's tremendous value in writing. I think there's tremendous value in so many things. When I look at my own writing, I don't think I got so much value out of like that traditional 5-paragraph essay, but I think self-reflective writing, like different types of things, like there's so many things that are conflicted. Like it's not writing that's problematic, it's the way in which we approach it sometimes. And so just revisiting why we do what we do. I've actually found that to be the number one challenge. I think when we talk about ethics and all these other things, there's so many issues that will be fixed, that can be fixed. But the one that scares me the most is we don't actually know why we do what we do. We go in, even with ChatGPT, when I watch people use it, sometimes give me a lesson on this, give me a standard this, give me a this, that. Why do you want that? And the faces are blank. And that to me is the scariest part of everything, that we could potentially use these tools to take things that are not great and do them faster and, proliferate bad practices even more.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about this, like I've been doing like hot takes lately, and like the hot take is maybe there isn't a 5-paragraph essay. Like college up, like these things are gone. And it's not necessarily that there's no purpose for a 5-paragraph essay, but what are we actually distilling from a 5-paragraph essay? It's creating a thesis, creating structure, being able to argue a point effectively, to be able to summarize, to be able to create multiple points of view, and to have a voice. Like, what does that mean? And then let's recreate that assignment that is going to be something that's going to be significantly more powerful moving forward. this is our forcing mechanism to actually change learning, which I think is really, really exciting. The question is how well are we going to do it? How much are we going to commit to that as a priority? And then how are we going to build the places in which people can be successful in those pieces? Because sometimes when you say, Saba, why you ask why these children do that, it might just be that they're so overworked, they haven't even had a second to think. And so it's not necessarily that they don't have that want or that need, it's that they don't have any space left to give you a really thoughtful answer. Because you know what we do is we ask a lot of our teachers, and that is very, very, very difficult. So what I want to do is I'm going to end on the point of saying, first of all, goodness gracious, how amazing is this panel? I just am so happy to have you all here, Brina, Claire, and Saba. We've got Barcelona. Please enjoy the beach for us and some sangria. So we've got Saba in the West Coast, Brina on the East Coast. Just want to say thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that's joined us today. You're from all over the world, and the amount of effort that you put into both listening, engaging, and communicating with each other has been really, really helpful. We hope to see you again. And just whether it's the morning, the evening, the middle of the night, just have a really good day. And thank you again to our panel. We just really appreciate everyone. Thanks so much.